to use his word, anti-absolutism, to use his word. And he believes that in such a way, it is um, a, a continuity from the original teaching. I hold a different view on that. I really don't think that it's accurate to characterize early Buddhist teaching as um, absolutism or anti-substantialism. In fact, you probably get the impression from today's lecture on how we're saying not self is really not about deconstructing an individual, so that individual is shown to be just a combination of parts. That's not what the Buddha was getting at.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of my thoughts had to do with kind of the scientistic view
Mm.
of self versus the kind of religious or
Yeah.
Buddhist notion of self. And it would be there's a couple of different there's scientism can go to psychology and the
Right.
early psychologists.
Right.
I was thinking like, okay, William James, I could use
Right.
William James, or I
Yeah.
could use
Yeah.
Freud, or I could.
Okay.
So
Let
that's
me
one idea, but
let me try to clarify at least one issue. You use the word scientistic as opposed to scientific, right? So those two are
yes,
different words. Well, when you
yes,
say
yeah.
scientistic, you're talking about, holding perhaps an inordinate amount of faith in science, believing that science somehow, is on par with religion when it comes to addressing the most fundamental existential question,
And
right?
that's
So it,
exactly
okay, good, 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 good.
that's
So
exactly what I'm thinking.
right.
Yes.
So so to explore that facet, right? The scientistic is different than to explore the scientific view on the so-called self, right?
Yeah, because I mean,
Okay.
Buddha, you could say that that is very scientific in that it has this experimental approach, to how you come about your knowledge. I mean, his whole exhortation to,
Yeah.
look at these ideas and
Mm.
figure out which of these, is true to you, and
Yeah.
how to
So,
deal with things, and
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
the empirical quality.
Empirical. Maybe calling it scientific is a little too much of a stretch. Personally, I feel empirical, maybe rationalist, maybe.
Yeah.
Right? Open inquiry, there's to some extent, spirit of open inquiry, yes. Yeah. But for something to be scientific, usually it would involve, using scientific methods, quantitative measurement, repeatable experiments,
An objective
controlling of variables. And I have serious
objectifiable
reservations.
results.
I don't think that those things can be found in Buddhism.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it would be the scientific versus the religious discontinuity, and in terms of like it would have to be like a concept of self or some kind of narrowed down
Okay, so
part
what do
of
you
our.
mean scientific view of self, though? I would understand the scientific view of a self, right? So in psychology, there are a lot of theories of mind about
Mhm,
how the experience of self comes to be, right?
mhm.
But what about the scientific view of self? What do you mean by that?
Well, I would mean that this is a kind of a dogma, like a dogmatic
Okay,
approach to
okay,
where you really do have like a positivist or
okay,
materialist
okay. I see.
perspective
I see.
that is like
I see.
exclusionary,
I see.
you know?
I see your point. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So maybe something like there is this, fundamentally uh physicalist, understanding of self as a, emergent phenomenon and right.
Sort
And
of,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, although
okay.
I have to do all the research. I'm
Yeah.
throwing this out there.
Sure, sure. Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
Okay,
By
but if
by
I
by the
could
way,
narrow it
we
down
actually
to
live in
like,
an age where many modern psychologists are doing comparative studies, right? They're looking at modern theories of the mind, modern theories of personality, and then comparing them with traditional Buddhist ones, which have yielded many interesting results too, just in case.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so then on going to a completely different place,
Mm.
I've been last term I was doing a study of chud or severance
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Buddhist in
Yeah.
Mahayana Buddhism,
Yeah.
and studying studying the writings of Machik Labarong,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
how and seeing a lot of continuities with very early Buddhist thinking
Sure.
in her concept
That's
of like
fascinating. Yeah.
the
It'll be built on something already written.
which would be, yeah, which I'm very interested in because just because it's like, wow, she
Yeah.
went to the Prajnaparamita teachings and the very early
Yeah.
to what is said, she went back to the very early Buddhist teachings, about, and she has this idea of like conceit, or inflation, she calls it, the devils of inflation, the tangible devils and intangible devils. And they all kind of go back to what the, Buddha's
Yeah.
early teachings. And
Yeah.
then I read that she had actually, really, she was like an incredible scholar of those
Which
teachings.
person was this again, please? Yeah.
Machik Labdron,
Oh, okay.
she,
Okay. Okay.
she kind of came up with the ritual around should, but it's very different from how it was, how it ended up becoming much more a lot of mythology,
Yeah.
a lot of, real tantric, magical kind of
Yeah.
stuff going on in it. But her early, her basic kind of
Mm.
bundle of concepts, as she
Yeah.
calls it,
Mm.
lays it out in a very different way
Mm.
that you can see the connections between it and the Heart
Sure.
Sutra and the early
Yeah. It
teaching.
sounds interesting. Yeah. Totally doable. Yeah.
That's another possibility. Okay, well, I'll think on both of those.
Sure.
You
Of
didn't,
course.
you didn't stomp on any of them, so that's great. And I will, I'll take that and think about it more, and then
Sounds good.
yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
okay,
And
I'll see you
bye bye bye
later.
the bye.
Okay,
Uh,
bye. And
share it, please.
I'll write you about
Sure. Will do.
contact information. Thanks.
Sure thing. Uh, Feel free to jump in, Jared or anyone else. Yeah.
All right, I'm jumping in.
Okay, cool.
Um, so with boundless consciousness, feeling into like the fabric of consciousness, what are signs that I'm moving in the right direction? Like how
You
do
say you're moving in a direction of what, immersing with Brahma
um
consciousness? Is that what you're saying?
well what I mean is boundless consciousness or just feels very subtle. And so sometimes I'm doing it and I'm like, well, am I actually doing it or do I just think I'm doing it? Like how do I know?
Did you say Brahma consciousness?
No,
Brahma?
sorry, boundless.
Thalamus? I'm sorry. I must be. What was the first word you said? What consciousness?
Boundless?
Boundless. Okay, boundless conscious. Got it. Got it. Got it. For a while, I kept thinking that you're doing Brahma consciousness. Oh, okay. We're delving into a Hindu territory here. I see. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. So there are a few things. One is that as you become more stabilized in your perception, equanimity increases. So equanimity is almost like a common denominator to all the different concentration states. Okay. And some concentration states are more conducive to more profound equanimity, to more lasting, to more immovable types of equanimity. So see if indeed by abiding in boundless consciousness, your mind becomes more and more peaceful. Sankharas really become reduced. Right? So that would be one thing. Yeah, and once this is done, there's so much that can be accomplished. Like for example, when you are in a state where sankharas are greatly reduced, you really come to see the reward, the benefit of renouncing sankhara. In the drawbacks of stress in sankharas become very obvious to you. And also that because craving is a kind of sankhara, well, while you're abiding in this firm, immovable equanimity, and then maintaining the understanding that this is the absence of sankhara. Don't just go into um, equanimity or peace like a indeterminate state. Kind of like, oh, I'm taking a nap here. Oh, it's not producing any fruit. It's not a constructive state. You're actually going into a coma-like state, right? So what's the right way to do it? The right way is to, even as you experience great pacification of sankhara, the resulting peace, you experience the peace as a function of pacified sankhara, as an absence of sankhara. So you know clearly there is this absence of sankhara. There's this freedom from sankhara. I don't know if that makes sense. So, in your everyday life, you're giving attention to sankhara. You're looking at what is the mind doing? What am I doing? And so forth. And as you quiet down, you don't lose this purview. You keep this in mind. What is sankhara? Well, here, the peace I experience is a result of sankharas having been pacified. It's a result of my not getting tangled up with sankharas. So the peace is not just like a stupid blanket peace, like blanket state. Yeah.
Yeah, when I do get peaceful
Mm,
and I don't see it as the Sankara is being pacified. It just feels so weird to me. Like
mm,
I'm in my ordinary state of mind, and then I start looking for consciousness, and it's right in front of me because it's always here.
right.
And then I feel peaceful,
Hmm.
but it's not obvious to me what I'm pacifying.
Okay. Then how is it that you're experiencing peace? Isn't peace, let me put it this way. The mind is kind of like a body of water, right? When you worry, when you experience dis-ease, a lack of peace, and so forth, it's like experiencing turbulence of water, right? When turbulence of water is pacified, then you experience peace. Isn't that what the subjective experience of peace like, right? Otherwise, how can we say that there's peace if the turbulence of this water body is not quietened down,
Mm.
right? Um, what does what does sankhara feel like? When we're in a hurry, right? It feels like something is pressing against us, something is pushing us forward. You could feel this. You could feel this momentum, right? When you're worrying, what does it feel? It feels like your mind's weighty, right? There's weight registered. It may not feel like that to you, okay? But I'm just giving you examples, right? What I'm trying to get at is that these mental states, there are palpable feelings associated with them. It's not just through thinking that you know that you're worrying. It's not just through thinking that you know you're impatient. You feel that you're impatient. You feel that you're restless, right? There's these energetic things that you experience, right? So remain sensitive to that. And you'll feel that peace is what is a direct function of the disappearance, of the softening, of the mitigation, of the turbulence, of that momentum, of the weight that you pick up, that you shoulder, that you drag behind you. It becomes a very palpable thing. You don't even need to think. You want to learn this so that you could potentially enter into these states in a nonverbal way, in a way where vitaka vichara disappear, and you would still be able to maintain that perception. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
That's helpful.
Good, good. If to even further help, notice how hindrances feel like stings in the mind. They feel like burning. They feel like squeezing. What does it feel like when you're bored? What does it feel like when you're agitated? There's a palpable momentum. Familiarize yourself with that. And then if you make a resolve to actively remove the momentum so that you're not being stirred up, shaken up, that's peace.
Yeah.
And this peace can, you could familiarize yourself to it, examine the quality, see what does it mean that it's a function of pacified sankhara. Feel it, enjoy the benefit of it. Like an initial perception I find useful has to do with a certain activity I do. Here where we are at the retreat center, we have a lot of granite, like big boulders, right? And sometimes when the weather is right, I go out there and I embrace these big rocks. I embrace these big boulders, right? The warm surface, and you have your face come in contact with the surface of the boulder. Your whole body is embracing the boulder, and you feel very good. You feel the presence. You feel the warmth. You feel the I don't know, the aura, if you will, of the boulder. And you could approach this inner peace that you're developing, this inner equanimity you're developing with the same attitude. You want to get closer to it. You want to submit yourself so that like you're prone on the surface. Yeah. You're not sticking any part out. Your whole body is prostrate to that comfortable surface. It's all enveloping. More of you is exposed to the warmth. This is one, just giving you an example of the, ways you can relate to this peace so that it becomes more enveloping, more intimate to you. Everyday life, even amidst agitated thoughts, there's a moment's worth of respite. There's a moment's worth of relief where you go, there's inner peace. It becomes more and more familiar to you. And then in your formal sitting, you are able to really put aside all conditions, really put aside worry, concerns, craving in relation to the world. You can just completely immerse in full abandonment, right? In peace. And then chances are you will go into very quiet state. And once you experience these are very, very useful for a whole host of purposes. Your wisdom can be easily developed when your mind begins to quiet down. The depth of the Dharma will begin to really speak to you. And what is suffering? And when you cannot be quiet down, when you're just, just fastened to sankharas and be tossed up and down and see how your mind, what it really wants when it has desire is to have that desire resolve, is to have peace. That's really what we want, not the secondary goals.
when I'm practicing in, like formal meditation, it feels like I'm only with balanced consciousness maybe like 30% to 50% of the time. Like my mind wanders and I come back to it. And is that normal? Is that, or
That's
am I?
perfectly normal. That's
Okay.
perfectly normal. Okay, so don't, but know that it is entirely possible for you to be fully immersed in peace. Know that as a possibility. Don't be critical about the present state, right? Don't become like a control freak. Oh, why am I not getting into, this nice state that you describe, right? Um, but at the same time, know that it's a possibility, so that you have a healthy attitude going into meditation. How is this healthy attitude characterized? You don't find meditation to be a daunting task. You don't find meditation to be this overly formalized thing, but rather it's something very straightforward, something very intimate, something you're just very familiar with. Right now, you could just, with a simple, like a moment of clarity, you could be directed to be in contact with inner peace already. Make sure that the way you go into meditation is not impeded by these subtle hindrances. And when we were younger, we were told by our parents to study harder. Maybe that doesn't happen with American kids, but Asian kids for sure, right? We're told to study harder. So every time when you're told to do something formally, it's almost like a natural, habitual tightening up. There's a little fear. There's a performance anxiety. Let go of that. See that this is really just a vacation. This could be 3 seconds. This could be 2 seconds worth of renunciation, 2 seconds worth of rest. It's at your disposal. It's at your call and beckon. You could anytime you want. You could revert back to it. It- the reason that you can only experience 30%, 50% of boundless consciousness, and you don't experience deeper equanimity, is because you are countenancing hindrances. You have to like not countenance hindrances. Hindrances means like, these tiny stings, these tiny barbs you can find in your mind. They're picking at you, that are bothering you, tormenting you in the background. The tiny bits of impatience, tiny bits of, compulsion to control, tiny bits of restlessness. Feel that as a turbulence in water. Really feel that. No suffering. No, that's a stress. Feel it as a tactile sensation, like a touch sensation. It's not just an idea that, oh, I'm restless, but you feel the touch sensation of restlessness. And if you're meticulous in such a way, your mind will become deeply quiet.
Yeah, I've been having trouble with moving in meditation where I'm like laying down and then like I move my hand one way and then put my hands behind my head and I'm just like
Yeah.
I'm like okay, the antidote to restlessness is not to move, but yet
No, no, that doesn't. Don't make that your primary concern, right? So, it, um, start your meditation just knowing that with reduced physical activity, you will have an easier time relaxing. That's it. It's not a dogma. It's not to make you immovable. Okay, if you somehow impose a sort of, like a mental frame, I'm not going to move at all. It's too much of a force,
hmm
too much pressure. Or instead, just tell yourself, you know what? by reducing physical activity, I'm going to have an easier time relaxing. And then does it feel good when you're deeply relaxed? Yes. And then what happens? You will naturally incline towards fewer activities. It's not a result of your, controlling yourself, locking yourself down.
Mm.
Okay? It's a matter of you're just spontaneously quieting down. You're just naturally frugal with um, any expenditure of energy. And then let this process be natural, meaning that, as your mind quiets down, you will just be too lazy to move. It's not that you try to control yourself, you just be too lazy to move.
And with boundless consciousness, should I also be practicing a satipatthana, like with it or on top of it?
Okay, so when you are practicing the balanced consciousness in the way we describe, you are already being sensitive to sankharas. That's a satipatthana right there. So the boundless consciousness state you go into, it will be liberative in nature. It will make you understand the origination of sankhara, the dissolution of sankhara. It's not a, like a karmically neutral coma-like state you go into. No. It's one where you're becoming more sensitive about both sankhara on the one hand and also resolution of sankhara, peace on the other hand.
Okay, and so to summarize what you've said about the sankharas, um, I am pacifying them by going into this like balanced consciousness peace state, and
Right.
then there's these like the hindrances and the stuff that's left are like stings, and I can just kind of like move away from
Right.
those too.
They're all sankharas.
Yeah.
They're sting like sankharas. Right, exactly. Okay, here's another helpful analogy. Um, when people tell you, hey, Jerry, you have a habit of frowning a lot, of tensing up your facial features. Okay, this is not true, by the way. Okay, I'm not. Um, so what's the way to correct it? Doesn't mean that you have to hold up a mirror in front of you all day long, frequently, to check up on whether or not you're frowning. No, you don't have to do that. You could just feel whether your facial muscles are tightened up. If you're sensitive enough, you know whether or not you're wrinkling up your face. What is suffering? What is sankhara? Sankhara is an inner wrinkling. It is a use of inner muscle, so you can feel it. It sounds so mysterious, but it's not. It's just a direct feeling. It's a sensation. When you worry, you have to tighten up your mind's muscle, so to speak. You have to wrinkle up the mind's surface, so to speak, for worry to be generated. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So feel the body of water that is your mind. When you're a really happy fish, there's no turbulence in the water, you've forgotten about the presence of water. No mind can be found. How do you know there's mind? When you get tossed up and down, stirred up whichever way, wow, the water is really violent. I live in the water. I live in the water. Right? Otherwise, water feels like emptiness to you. So feel the momentum of the mind as sankhara, right? Really go out of your way to remove the coarser ones called hindrances, the stings, the barbs, the ones that are gnawing at you, harassing you, tormenting you. Really throw them, like if you fully recognize, if you really not countenance the tiniest hindrances, you're in a very wakeful state. You're in a very alert state. That's called abiding in heedfulness. Just do this and you will already experience profound peace. Just do this. How do you go into first jhana? Seclude yourself from hindrances. Take a vacation from hindrances. That's it. That's it. That's all it takes for you to experience. Wow. So the mind, when it's not poked at, when it's not stung, the mind feels harmless, feels at peace, feels good.
And how do I remove hindrances?
Be aware of them as muscle movements, as momentum. Don't just think about, oh, you have this hindrance, but rather feel them at the tactile level. You just do this, they will naturally dissipate. Feel them at the tactile level. And yes, if you like to make it even more powerful, create a resolve, right? Resolve in your mind. I will not countenance hindrances wherever I go, wherever I find them. I will not countenance them. A worrying thought, like an instance of impatience, instance of restlessness. And you go, oh, but that's so hard. I can't, I'm far from perfect. No, you don't have to be perfect. As soon as you notice, like an example of hindrance, feel it at the tactile level so that it can dissipate, so that you're not just like repeating it. You're not just getting blindly tormented by these
Mm.
things. Yeah. Lay them bare in mindfulness. That's another way of putting it, in mindful awareness. You could do this like any time, and you'll notice your mind immediately calming down. Is there anything bothering you? And don't, most of us will, oh, nothing's bothering me. But our standards are too low. If you really pay attention, chances are you'll notice that in the background there's some amorphous impatience. There's some amorphous worrying. There's some, like some vague, some nebulous poking at the mind. Oh, I want to, I miss that thing. I feel nostalgic for something. I look forward to. Or these tiny things are poking at you. Always feel these, don't tolerate these things, and you're automatically at peace.
What do you mean by countenance?
Countenance means to tolerate. So,
Okay.
okay, normal, like non-meditating people, they experience hindrances all day long with such high frequency. Because why? They tolerate these hindrances. They're so used to, it's like we're born as cows and horses, and we're stung by gadflies. We're stung by horseflies all day long, and that's our default state. We take that as normal. We're acclimatized to it. So we're not aware of that fact. We're just tossing and turning in non-mindfulness. We're still being tormented by the hindrances, but in an unawareing way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas when you direct awareness to this fact, to this brutal fact, I am being tormented. Okay. And you pay attention to all the torments at the tactile level. What happens? In almost natural, almost automatically, the effort that goes into creating that self-torment will dissipate. It will release itself. Now, most Buddhists will tell you, oh, that's just a temporary suspension of the hindrances, temporary suppression of the hindrances. That's just a very minor thing. No, in the suttas, if you're able to overcome your hindrances, you're a master at satipatthana. It doesn't take much. It just takes vigilance on your part, alertness on your part, just the know-how on your part. Put your mind to this. Don't tolerate hindrances. All day long, let your mind unfurl so it doesn't sport a frown. Don't allow the wrinkle to form in your inner muscle. Let it relax, let it open up. And your mind will naturally be at peace.
Does boundless consciousness lead to some sort of like samadhi state of like unification of consciousness or something like that?
Yes and no. It's very hard to um you could talk about this from a Vedanta perspective using like a Hindu model, or you could talk about this using like a Buddhist model. I mean, there's so many different ways. You don't have to make it very sophisticated, but I'm sorry, you don't have to make this very complex. All we have to know is that this is a useful perception. Why? Because it creates equanimity. It's a very quick way. It's a rather natural way of arriving at equanimity, i.e., inner peace. One way to describe the process is that initially it is a kind of perception, but then, as the sankharas are pacified, it increasingly is not just a perception. Rather, it becomes like your surrender to natural awareness. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay. By the way, next Monday is President's Day, so no classes are held and no office hours will be held. Just to let you know beforehand. Next Monday. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope that's clear to you too, 若静, right? 下星期美国有假日，所以我们不会有 office hours，不会有课。
Dr. Chu, so I have a question. So you said about the seeing is seeing, 看只是看 seeing is seeing, right? So I think when I look around, is that there is a ignorance, already has a ignorance when I see something like I see a rose tree, but I see the rose flower. I didn't see the green ones. I mean, the rose leaves. Is that ignorance?
No, that's not what ignorance means. Ignorance is not your failure at omniscience, your failure at taking in all the possible data out there. Okay. The nature of sensory media is such that they are filters, they're delimiting filters. They can only take in so much. We as human beings can only uh, detect a tiny sliver of the entire light spectrum, right? So ignorance is not, your ability to only be able to see a tiny sliver of light spectrum. It doesn't mean that. Yeah. The teaching of seeing is only in the seeing, hearing is only in the heard, and so forth, has to do with, once again, gradual pacification sankhara. Okay. When we're seeing things, you don't just experience seeing. There are all sorts of activities, all sorts of sankharas that are going on. For example, as soon as you see something, you're reminded who you are. There's an inner tightening. There is a accretion of a certain identity. When you're seeing something, you're not just passively receiving, you're actively sending out your antenna to look for the part in your visual field that appeals to your greed, for example. You're checking out on people, you're doing people watching. When you're doing people watching, you're applying a filter, you're selectively focusing on the parts that elicit lust, for example, right? Um, in the end, the ultimate sankhara, the subtle sankhara is conceit. So in the experience of seeing, if you go, I see, I am the seer, and so forth, there's already sankhara. Yeah. And at the other end of the spectrum, at the beginning of the practice, you're just aiming for a course level equanimity. You're not completely swamped by blind reactions to what you're saying. You're allowing some measure of equanimity to protect yourself, right? So you're not swamped by reactions. You're able to look at your activities more objectively. That's the other end of the spectrum. This end, when it's taken to its natural conclusion, is an ultimate equanimity is what? The ultimate pacification of sankhara is what? It's nibbana. I
So
don't
the
know if
nib
that makes sense to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is like, if I see something, it's like I look around, I see the trees and something, right? And then there's a mind comes in. There's a thought comes in. Oh, I remember. Oh, this reminds me of my years ago I visited somewhere else, right? So that is a sankhara, right? That's the ignorance.
A Buddha is fully capable of forming a thought. So just because you give rise to a thought doesn't necessarily mean that it's the sort of sankhara that produces suffering. It's our having relationships with thought that makes a thought oppressive.
Oh,
So not every movement is an instance of sankhara. Right? We could see the tree leaf falling. We could see, flowers blossoming. These are movements in our environment, right? But these movements, they don't necessarily create stress. The Buddha is fully capable of forming a sentence, or calling forth a memory. The Buddha is fully capable of doing that. And a living arhat is fully capable of doing that.
oh,
It's something else. After the rise of a thought, we do something else. We embed a sense of self in that thought. We believe in that thought. We allow ourselves to fall under the swaying effect of that thought. We react to the thought. We tense up in response to the thought. So on and so forth. There are very specific sankharas that are responsible for creating suffering. So be sensitive to that. Look at the way you use your inner muscle. Why do we suffer? Because internally we're doing this. We're wringing like a cloth, right? Inside the mind, it feels like if we're frowning. That's what creates an oppressive feeling, right? It's not a hard to understand teaching. It's like when you do this. Why do you call this an unnatural posture? Because to maintain this posture, you need to keep straining yourself. You need to keep putting in energy to maintain this posture. This is not a natural resting posture, right? Eventually, you're going to tire yourself out. Eventually, you're going, oh, this is really painful. My muscles sore, right? It becomes increasingly hard to maintain this posture. That's a sankhara we are talking. That's a sankhara responsible for generating suffering. So thoughts, it can arise fleetingly, harmlessly. But then it's like no one's fastened to those thoughts, forming emotional connections to the thought, making a big deal out of the thought, showing interest in those thoughts, responding to the thought, getting fired up by the thoughts, getting intoxicated by the thought, and so forth. Those are the sankharas responsible for generating suffering.
So if I saw something and I remember, I think there's a thought comes in. It's like, oh, remind me of the years ago I visited someplace else. It's the same environment, right? So at that time, if I indulge,
As soon as you go, I am, right? I used to be you're already doing selfing, and selfing always come with some subtle stress. We don't even have to talk about the core stress that's generated by the activity. But the selfing as an activity has its own subtle, insidious, latent stress.
oh yeah,
As soon as you go, I am, in the past, I did this and that, and you really identify with that,
yeah,
you're coalescing into a being, and then you need to protect that boundary. When someone reminds you, hey, you're a daughter, right? As soon as you really commit yourself to it, I am a daughter, there's already stress. You don't need to add anything. You don't have to say, oh, you're a bad daughter. Oh, you have the hardworking daughter. You don't even need, as soon as you're someone, as soon as there's a selfing, there's subtle delimiting activity going on in the mind. There's subtle exertion. There's a need to define. There's a need to maintain.
but Dr. Chu, you said is not the arahant can have some can have thoughts, right? Say
Yes.
something, and what is the thought
There's no
about?
emotional commitment. There's no self-identification with those thoughts.
It will remind him something else, or can he do that? I mean,
You can, okay, for communication purposes, right? Naraha could form a thought to say something to himself or to say something to another person. But then there's no emotional commitment to a thought. When a thought goes, I am so and so, it serves only a linguistic purpose. There's no emotional entrancing. You don't enter into a thought, I am so and so. I get, swayed by the thought. I really believe that thought. There's no such effect. There's no self-identification. The Buddha will continue to say, oh, yesterday I went to Anandapindika's park. Right. The Buddha is capable of saying, when people ask him, what were you like when you were 7 years old? And Buddha was able to bring forth a memory. When I was 7 years old, I was this and that. But then there's no self-identification.
okay.
Learn to recognize that sankhara, a self-identification sankhara.
Yeah, I see. Okay,
It's
okay,
an
good.
exertion. It's an
Yeah.
exertion.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Mhm.
okay, I see. Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, well, if there's not anything else, we could always wrap it up here. Is that okay?
I have another question. Is that okay?
Of course. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm an introvert. Not super heavy, but introverted. And I find that when I'm around people, my energy drains kind of quick. And I was wondering
Yep.
if there's a way to kind of like maintain it longer.
Yeah. Well, firstly, we should recognize the superhuman advantage you enjoy as an introvert when it comes to meditation, right? I wouldn't be surprised that the Buddha was an introvert. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Most accomplished meditators, I wouldn't, invariably characterize them as introverts, but they have a tendency to find solace inside, not find solace via external interactions. Yeah. And then if you're fe feeding yourself very well with peace, with these nice things, then it has a spillover effect. It spills into the way you interact with people. This may or may not take very specific form. You may remain an introvert, like you don't like spending too much time with people. There are arhats who are like that, by the way, right? It's not that somehow, oh, you become fully liberated, and then this full liberation completely wipe clean all of your preferences, your tendencies. It doesn't work like that. So you could choose to be, an arahat who's somewhat more communicative, or you could choose to be an arahat who primarily uses silence as a teaching mode, or use words sparingly as a teaching style, right? In the end, if you have peace, if you're well fed inside, why does it matter? These personal idiosyncrasies. You're a little, more quiet than other people, a little more extroverted than other people, and so forth. But when you speak in harmony. You speak in a way where the harmonious atmosphere is not undermined, right? And when you're in silence, you're not bored. You enjoy that silence. So in that regard, why is being introverted, extroverted so such a big deal? Such a be comfortable, yeah.
Is
And
there
yes, there will be social occasions where you will feel the urge to be a little more expressive, right? The wisdom will tell you, hey, this is an occasion when you need to speak up, when you need to articulate clearly. Yeah. And guess what? You don't have to be super eloquent and long-winded to be persuasive. People can have their own unique style of being persuasive. You could be the quiet guy, frugal with his words, but then the words are well spoken and they're uttered in apparent sincerity and apparent earnestness. You're just as moving as something that's long-winded, as effective, yeah, if not more so. Out of compassion, out of metta, right? You're looking at, you're feeling stress, suffering in this environment, which cannot be called inside or outside. In this non-dual mode, it's just suffering. And then that will propel you to maybe sometimes do more, sometimes do less. To be a little more, observant about other people's reactions and tailor your approach to them because of your compassion. Um, and sometimes because of your wisdom, you go, you know what? I'm not going to waste my time speaking. It's going to be futile on this occasion to these people, right? And that's fine too.
and how can I manage my energy so I'm not as tired after being around people?
Yeah, find a reasonable excuse to retire yourself for a moment. Yeah, need to use the washroom. Like you could, someone you regularly contact, you just confide to them about, oh, like I will occasionally need a little like self-imposed exile, a little vacation, 5-minute break. You get a breather. Yeah, there's so many things you can do, but if you are feeding yourself properly with inner peace at high frequency, however short the duration, chances are you'll be balanced. Chances are you'll, know the appropriate response, how to adapt to environment. Sometimes there are situations where you cannot excuse yourself physically. You just have to deal with it. And you need to bring forth greater equanimity. You need to be able to find rest between words, between utterances. Are there short pauses between your thoughts, between the uttering of sounds? And all those occasions, you'll be able to find new nourishment. You frequently relax. How long does it take for you to relax yourself? It takes a second to unload, right? It takes half a second to remind yourself that you don't need to accumulate anything here. You don't need to let tension build up. Tension can be immediately released. It doesn't have to be, like cooped up inside and carry it around. It can be instantaneously released. Your fresh, blank, um, state. Reward yourself frequently with peace, with inner silence. It's great that your natural inclination is to, resort to such a thing as charging station. It's great. We're natural meditators as introverts. Be happy about that. Yeah?
All right, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So until next time, please take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.